She looked like any other teenage girl, quiet, respectful, and holding a first-class boarding pass with both hands like it might disappear. But the lead flight attendant didn't care. One glance was all it took. A snap judgment. And just like that, she accused the girl of being in the wrong seat. She embarrassed her in front of the entire cabin. Sent her to the back without so much as a question. The other passengers watched in silence. Not a single voice spoke up. No one defended her. What the attendant failed to notice was the man sitting calmly just one row away, composed, still, watching every moment unfold. He wasn't just a father. He was the billionaire owner of Orion Air. And the second he pulled out his phone, the flight took a turn no one saw coming. She sat by the window, fingers gently wrapped around the armrest of her first-class seat. Her name was Lila Carter. She wore a soft gray hoodie and well-worn jeans. Nothing designer, just comfort. Her backpack was tucked neatly under the seat in front of her, and a paperback book rested on her lap. She'd boarded Orion Flight 227 alone, clutching her boarding pass like it was something fragile. It was her first time flying without family, and though a soft flutter of nerves lived in her chest, she felt proud. Her father had surprised her with this ticket after her final grades came, in straight A's, just like he hoped. "You've earned a taste of comfort," he had said with a grin. So here she was, looking out at the airport crew on the tarmac, heart steady. She had no idea that in just minutes the entire cabin would be staring at her. The sound of heels clicking along the aisle grew louder. It was Denise Walker, the lead flight attendant. Her blonde hair was twisted tightly into a bun, and her navy blue uniform looked freshly pressed. Denise had been with Orion Air for over 10 years and was well known among the crew firm, disciplined and always in charge. She was making her final walkthrough when her eyes landed on Lila. Her stride slowed. Her face changed not with confusion or concern, but with quiet disapproval. She stepped closer, stopping beside Lila's row, head tilted just slightly. "Hi there," Denise said politely, though there was a sharpness under her tone. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" And Lila looked up, startled. "Yes, this is 1C. Denise held out her hand. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Lila handed it over without hesitation. Denise stared at the ticket, her lips pressing into a thin, tight line. She glanced between the seat number and the girl sitting in it. Then she scanned the cabin passengers were beginning to notice. She leaned in slightly, her voice quieter, but still clear enough for nearby ears. "And where exactly did you get this ticket?" "My dad booked it," Lila answered, confused. "Is he traveling with you today?" Denise asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "No. Flying solo." Denise handed the ticket back, but didn't step away. Her posture stiffened. "This section is reserved for paid first-class passengers only," she said coolly. "It's not for promotional or upgraded seats." Lila's brows lifted. "It's not an upgrade. My dad bought the ticket. This is my seat." Denise's voice snapped just a bit sharper. "Listen, sweetheart, I don't know what the gate agents told you, but you need to head to the back. You're holding up the boarding process." The words landed like a slap. Lila blinked, feeling dozens of eyes on her. Still no one spoke up. No one questioned it. She swallowed the lump rising in her throat, reached down for her backpack, and stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. But something inside her cracked just a little. As Lila walked down the aisle past rows of silent strangers, Denise stood tall, as if she'd just fixed a problem no one else had seen. Lila found an empty row near the back. She slid into the seat, tucked her bag beneath her feet, and stared straight ahead. Then she reached for her phone and typed a message. "She made me leave first class. She even slapped the ticket from my hand." She hit send. Just a few rows ahead, the man who had been watching everything silently adjusted his cufflinks and unlocked his phone. Grant Carter didn't react visibly. His expression remained composed, unreadable, but his eyes scanned the message slowly, deliberately. He didn't look up. He didn't need to. He had seen enough. Grant wasn't just another passenger on Orient Flight 207. He was the man who owned the airline. And the girl who had just been humiliated? She was his daughter. In economy class, Lila Carter sat motionless, her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of her. Her body stayed still, but her hands trembled lightly in her lap. The engines hadn't even started yet, but the flight already felt unbearable. Her cheeks were still warm from the humiliation. But what ached more than Denise Walker's actions was the silence of the strangers around her. Not one voice had spoken up. Not one passenger had said, "She belongs here." She had done everything right. Her ticket was valid. She had followed every rule. And still she had been treated like she didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again. "Grant, what do you mean she made you leave? What happened?" Lila hesitated, then typed quickly. "She looked at me, didn't believe my ticket was real. Told me to move. Said I didn't belong there." There was a pause. Then another message. "Grant, what's the flight number?" Her heart thudded faster. She knew that tone, short, direct, focused. Her father didn't yell. He never needed to. When Grant Carter spoke, people listened. She fumbled through her backpack, found the boarding pass, and sent a photo of it. Seconds later, a new message appeared. "Grant, stay where you are. Don't worry about anything." Lila exhaled slowly. She didn't know what her father was about to do, but she trusted him. He always followed through. At the front of the plane, Denise Walker moved through the first-class cabin with smooth efficiency, her expression cool, her voice polite. She handed out menus, folded blankets, and checked seat belts as if nothing had happened. She passed by Grant without so much as a glance. She didn't recognize him, didn't know that the man sitting in 1D, dressed in a sleek navy suit with a small silver lapel PINA symbol only a few in the aviation world would recognize, had just watched her make the biggest mistake of her career. He didn't say a word, but his presence changed the air, the kind of calm that's more dangerous than any outburst. He opened his phone, tapped a single contact marked Orion Command HQ, and made the call. By the time Denise returned to the galley and poured herself a cup of coffee, the cockpit had already received the call. A flight manager was already patched in. The captain, a seasoned pilot of more than 20 years, leaned back in his seat, listening closely to what came next. Denise had no idea. To her, Lila Carter was just another mistake. A girl who didn't look like she belonged in first class. Another problem quietly solved. But the real passenger she had just crossed wasn't the teenager in the hoodie. It was the silent man in one Dan she had just embarrassed his daughter. Inside the cockpit, the call came in with quiet urgency. The co-pilot looked over at Captain Hale, who nodded and activated the secure screen on the in-flight console. A stern-looking operations executive appeared on the display. "Captain Hale, we have an issue involving a first-class removal. Passenger name, Lila Carter." The captain straightened in his chair. "What's the situation?" The voice on the screen lowered. Her boarding pass was valid. Assigned seat 1C. A flight attendant forcibly moved her to economy without cause. A beat passed. Then the executive added, "That passenger is the daughter of Grant Carter." The name hit the cockpit like a lightning bolt. Captain Hale didn't flinch, but his instincts went into full alert. He had heard of Grant Carter many times before, CEO of Orion Air Group, a man known for keeping a low profile, rarely traveling with bodyguards, and never needing to raise his voice to change an entire system. And now he was on board. This flight was about to get a whole lot more complicated. His influence reached through every level of the company. And now that he was on board, things were about to get very serious. The officer on the screen continued, "Mr. Carter is currently seated in 1D. He hasn't spoken a word to anyone on board, but he contacted executive control directly. He wants the situation addressed immediately and personally." Captain Hale gave a single sharp nod. "Understood. Summon the flight attendant who removed the passenger." In the galley, Denise Walker stirred sugar into her coffee, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. To her, this had been a quick correction, a necessary one. A teenager in first class without the look of a high-tier flyer? She thought she'd done the airline a favor, kept standards intact. She hadn't noticed the awkward silence between her fellow crew, or the way they avoided her gaze. Then the intercom buzzed overhead. "Ms. Denise Walker, please report to the cockpit immediately." The spoon clinked sharply against the ceramic as her hand froze. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard right. But when she glanced up, the other attendants suddenly busied themselves with trays and checklists, their faces tight. She set the cup down, straightened her jacket, and walked stiffly toward the front. As she moved through the first-class aisle, she didn't see Grant Carter watching her. He didn't blink, didn't speak. But his gaze followed her the entire way, cold, controlled, impossible to ignore. She entered the cockpit, clearly unsettled. Captain Hale gestured for her to take the seat beside him. Her eyes landed on the screen, where a senior officer from Orion Command stared back at her with narrowed eyes. "Ms. Walker," the man began. A first-class passenger was removed from her seat. "Lila Carter, explain." She cleared her throat, trying to maintain her poise. "Yes, sir. There was a young girl in 1C. She appeared to be in the wrong section. I asked her to move. I believed it was just a small correction." The officer didn't flinch. "Did you verify her boarding pass?" I glanced at it. Briefly. I didn't recognize the name. She didn't seem like she belonged in first class." Captain Hale arched an eyebrow. "You moved her based solely on how she looked?" Denise hesitated. "I made a judgment call." The officer leaned in slightly on the screen. "Ms. Walker, the passenger you humiliated is Lila Carter, the daughter of Grant Carter, your employer, the man who owns the airline you're standing in right now." The blood drained from her face. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," the officer said, his voice like ice. Captain Hale exhaled slowly. "Orders from Mr. Carter are clear. You will return to Lila Carter, apologize publicly, and personally escort her back to her seat in first class. Upon landing, you will report to the executive board for a formal conduct review." Denise Walker sat frozen, her mind spinning. Her polished exterior, the one she wore like armor on every flight, began to crack. The girl she had dismissed as a mistake had more power than she could have imagined. And now she was the one being summoned. Her fingers trembled as she stepped out of the cockpit. She tried not to show it, but the tension followed her like a shadow. The moment she re-entered the first-class cabin, she felt it, the shift. The atmosphere was denser now, heavier. Passengers who had smiled at her earlier now looked away. Others stared with subtle curiosity. And in 1D, Grant Carter sat unmoving, his eyes fixed on her, cold, measured, unforgiving. She lowered her gaze and walked past him, slower now, her confident stride gone. No one helped. No one offered a word. This walk she would take alone. In economy, Lila Carter sat quietly by the window, earbuds in, her eyes unfocused. She hadn't cried, not once, but that didn't mean she wasn't hurt. The way Denise had spoken to her, the looks from strangers, the shame of walking down that aisle as if she were intruding in a space not meant for her, of it still lingered. She hadn't expected justice. Not here. Not today. So when Denise Walker finally stopped beside her row, Lila didn't move. Lila Carter didn't react right away. but she felt the presence before she heard the voice. "Miss Carter," came a voice, low and unsure. Denise Walker knelt slightly beside the seat, lowering herself to Lila's level. Her voice was thinner now, uncertain. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." Lila removed one earbud and turned slowly toward her. Her expression didn't shift. Denise forced a tight smile, one that never reached her eyes. "I'd like to escort you back to your original seat, first class." Lila stared at her for a long moment. No movement. No reply. "I apologize," Denise added quickly, "if there was any inconvenience." Only then did Lila's expression change just a little. "You're calling it a misunderstanding?" Denise hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, a seating error." Lila's voice remained soft, but each word landed like a stone. "You looked at my ticket. You saw my name. And you still told me to move." A quiet ripple of sound spread across a few nearby rows. People were listening now, more than before. Denise's palms began to sweat. I may have misjudged the situation," she admitted. Lila tilted her head ever so slightly. "That's not the same as a misunderstanding?" Denise's throat tightened. Layla reached for her phone and quickly typed a message to her father. "She's asking me to come back now. What should I do?" Seconds later, the response came through. "Grant, take your time. Make her understand what she did." Lila tucked the phone back in her bag and looked up, meeting Denise's eyes. "He'll go back," she said, voice steady. "But first, I want to know why you thought I didn't belong there." Denise opened her mouth, but no words came. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "You didn't ask anyone else for their ticket," Lila continued. "Just me." "Why?" The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, heavy. Passengers nearby stopped pretending not to listen. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged looks, their faces stiff. Earlier in the cockpit, the replay continued in Denise's mind. She had sat there while Captain Hale motioned for her to explain. "There was a young girl in 1C," she had said, voice trembling. She looked out of place. "I asked her to move." It seemed like a simple correction. "Did you verify her boarding pass?" asked the executive from Orion Command. I looked at it briefly. I didn't recognize the name." "You made her move based on how she looked?" Captain Hale had pressed. "I made a judgment call," Denise said quietly. She didn't seem like a first-class passenger. The officer's expression had darkened. "Ms. Walker, the young woman you humiliated is the daughter of Grant Carter, your employer, the owner of this airline." The breath had caught in her throat. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," he said coldly. Captain Hale had delivered the final instruction. "You are to apologize to Lila Carter in front of the passengers and personally escort her back to 1C. After landing, you'll report to the executive board for formal review." Now, as Denise Walker stood once more in the economy aisle, the weight of her choices bore down on her. The girl she had dismissed so easily now sat before her calm, collected, and no longer silent. And Denise felt it, the shift. The composed shell she wore on every flight, the one polished by years of control and protocol, had cracked. She stepped back into the first-class cabin to retrieve the seat, but everything had changed. The air itself felt tighter. The atmosphere was suffocating. Passengers who had greeted her earlier now looked away. A few watched with quiet intensity, their curiosity sharpened. And in seat 1D, Grant Carter sat motionless, cold, unreadable. His stare followed her like a shadow. Her footsteps, once brisk and confident, were slow now. The hum of the aircraft, once white noise, now rang like a warning. She had taken that aisle walk hundreds of times, but never like this. No one offered her help. No one met her eyes. This time she was walking alone. The hum of the plane had never sounded so loud, almost mocking. As Denise Walker made her way past the galley, every step felt exposed. The other crew members watched her in silence. Not one of them offered a nod, a glance, or a hand. This walk, she realized, was hers to make completely alone. In the back, Lila Carter sat stiffly in her narrow seat, earbuds in, eyes focused on the window. She hadn't shed a single tear, but that didn't mean she wasn't hurting. The way Denise had spoken to her, the way strangers had stared without question, the quiet shame of walking that aisle like she was trespassing still clung to her like static. She hadn't expected justice. Not here, not on this flight. So when Denise Walker finally stopped beside her row, Lila didn't flinch. She felt her presence before the woman spoke. "Miss Carter," Denise said softly, crouching beside her, lowering herself like someone approaching a fragile situation. Her voice trembled, subtly, but enough. "There appears to have been a misunderstanding." Lila slid one earbud out and turned her head. Her face stayed still, unreadable. Denise offered a polite smile that had no real warmth. "I'd like to escort you back to your original seat. In first class." Lila stared at her. No expression. No immediate response. "I apologize," Denise added quickly. If there was any inconvenience caused, Lila's eyes narrowed just slightly. "You're calling it a misunderstanding?" Denise hesitated. "Yes. An error in seating." Lila's voice remained even, but every word was sharp. "You saw my ticket, and you still told me to leave." There was a subtle gasp a few rows ahead, someone listening, someone remembering. "I may have made a mistake in judgment," Denise said, her voice drier now, her hands starting to sweat. "That's not the same," Lila said, tilting her head ever so slightly, "as a misunderstanding." Denise didn't answer. Lila picked up her phone again and typed out a message. "She's asking me to come back. What should I do?" Seconds later, the reply buzzed in her palm. "Grant, take your time. Make her understand what she did." She slipped the phone back into her bag, then turned her gaze on Denise, direct and calm. "I'll return to my seat," she said. "But first, I want to know why you thought I didn't belong there." Denise opened her mouth, closed it. Her eyes dropped to the floor. "You didn't ask anyone else for their ticket?" Lila continued. "Just me. Why?" That silence, the one between them, was heavier than anything the engines could produce. All around them, the passengers stopped pretending to look away. Some stared straight ahead, uncomfortable. Others glanced from side to side, eyebrows raised. At the front of the plane, Denise reached for the galley counter, needing something solid to ground herself. Her hands trembled. She didn't dare sit. Every moment from earlier replayed in her mind. Her voice telling Lila to move. Her own smug certainty that she was doing her job. The self-righteous confidence that came from years of routine. Now it all felt cold, bitter, small. Across the galley, Tessa Monroe, the junior attendant, stood quietly. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said enough. Tessa had been trained by Denise how to handle tough passengers, how to keep things smooth under pressure. But now it was Tessa who looked composed, and Denise who was unraveling. Denise grabbed a napkin, wiped her palms. Her thoughts circled, frantic, around Grant Carter. He hadn't spoken a single word to her, hadn't raised his voice. But every look, every calm instruction, carried more pressure than any shouting match ever could. That man didn't control just people, he controlled systems. And now she was in his system. She glanced at the coffee machine, just to have something to look at, anything to distract from the rising wave of panic. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Lila. The way she'd spoken. The calm, sure tone. The way she didn't need to yell to be heard. It was infuriating, in a way Denise couldn't even articulate. She'd dealt with rude passengers, arrogant ones, demanding ones. But Lila Carter hadn't been any of those things. She had simply asked, why? And Denise Walker had no answer that didn't sound ugly when spoken out loud. But Lila Carter hadn't yelled. She hadn't made a scene or demanded attention. She had simply asked why, and Denise Walker had no answer that didn't sound awful once spoken out loud. "You should probably sit down before you collapse," Tessa Monroe finally muttered from the other side of the galley. Denise turned sharply, her voice tight. "I don't need your commentary." Tessa raised her hands, expression unreadable. "Just saying. You're sweating through your uniform." Denise didn't respond. She hated how visibly shaken she still washed her hands, trembling, her chest tight. Tessa crossed her arms, watching. "If I'm being honest, I don't think she's the one breaking down. That girl's been sitting there like she owns the sky since she came back. And you look like you're about to be sick." Denise's jaw tensed. "She humiliated me." Tessa's brow lifted. "No?" She asked a question. "You humiliated yourself." Denise said nothing. Her throat burned. Tessa exhaled, softer this time. "Look, maybe you didn't mean it the way it came out. Maybe you've done things like this before, and no one noticed." She paused. "But this time, you picked the wrong person. You made it public, and now it's public for you too." Denise leaned against the galley counter, finally letting her arms fall to her sides. She stared down at the smooth floor. Her voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. "I didn't think." Tessa cut in gently but firmly. "That's the problem. You didn't think. You saw a girl who didn't look like your version of first class, and you acted." Denise's mouth opened slightly. No words came out. She wanted to say she was following protocol, that she was protecting the premium experience. But deep down, even she didn't believe that anymore. Meanwhile, in first class, Lila Carter sat back in her seat, legs crossed, a glass of sparkling water resting delicately in her hand. She wasn't sulking. She wasn't smiling. She simply existed, calm, unbothered, fully aware of her place in that room. But the room around her had shifted. Passengers who had earlier looked through her now stole glances over magazines and screens. Some looked guilty, others curious. A man across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, then leaned slightly toward her. I saw what happened earlier," he said hesitantly. Lila turned her head. "Yes?" He cleared his throat. "It was, unfortunate. Clearly a mistake." Lila tilted her head slightly. "A mistake." He fumbled. "Well, she probably didn't mean it that way." Her voice didn't waver. "She looked at me, assumed I didn't belong, didn't verify anything, and told me to move." He nodded weakly. "Right, but she didn't know who you were." Lila gave a small smile, one that never quite reached her eyes. "And if I wasn't someone important, would it have been okay then?" He had no answer. Couldn't find one. Lila turned away, ending the conversation with quiet finality. She didn't need validation, didn't crave sympathy. She had already said what needed to be said. Her phone buzzed again. "Grant, we land in 45 minutes. Sit tight." She stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Lila, I'm good." She placed the phone on the tray table and leaned back. The seat was comfortable now, not because of the cushion or the leg room, but because this time she belonged in it. And no one, no voice, no stare, no uniform could challenge that again. In the galley, Denise Walker stood stiffly, pretending to adjust the drinks cart, though she hadn't moved anything for minutes. The weight of what was coming settled in her chest like a closing grip. Every few moments, she glanced toward the curtain that separated her from the first-class cabin, as if trying to measure the distance between herself and the consequences she had triggered. But the curtain was an illusion. There was no distance, not anymore. Her name had already begun to ripple in whispers down the aisles. Her behavior was being dissected, replayed, discussed in quiet tones. There was no escaping it now. Not from the passengers, not from her crew, and not from herself. Tessa didn't speak again. She didn't have to. The silence between them said everything. Denise Walker, once the voice of protocol and perfection, the one who gave orders and corrected younger staff, now stood frozen. Her badge no longer felt like authority. It felt like weight. Then the in-flight phone on the wall buzzed. Denise flinched. Her pulse jumped. She reached for the receiver with an unsteady hand and pressed it to her ear. "This is Denise," she said, her voice stiff. The voice on the other end was slow, smooth, unmistakably firm. "This is Grant Carter." Her breath caught. For a second, the entire world went still. Denise Walker's breath hitched. For a moment, the world felt suspended. "I trust," he continued, "you now understand who I am and what you've done." She couldn't find words. Her mouth opened, then closed again. "I've already spoken with operations," he said. "There will be a formal review. You'll be expected to account for every decision you made on this flight, every word, every expression." Finally, her voice returned in a whisper. "Mr. Carter, I'm not interested in excuses," he cut in sharply. "This isn't about me. It's about my daughter. You made her feel like she didn't belong. You treated her like a problem. And you did it in front of a plane full of people who chose to stay silent." His words weren't loud, but they landed like thunder. Her skin burned with shame, as if the spotlight had turned inward. All her years of authority and order couldn't protect her from this. "You'll ensure that she receives the same level of service every first-class passenger receives," he added. "Exactly the same. Nothing more, nothing less." "Yes, sir," she managed to say. The call ended with a quiet click. Denise slowly lowered the phone, her stomach twisting into knots. Her knees wobbled slightly. She reached for the counter to steady herself. She had spent her entire career learning how to control cabins, manage emergencies, enforce protocol. But now, she couldn't even control her own voice. Across the galley, Tessa Monroe was watching her. "That him?" she asked quietly. Denise nodded once. Tessa exhaled. "Well, he didn't yell." "No," Denise muttered. "He didn't have to." Meanwhile, back in her seat, Lila Carter sat in silence. She had returned to her book, though the words on the page didn't register. Her mind was still unraveling the moments that had built to know the confrontation, the humiliating walk, the cold silence of everyone who had witnessed it. What gnawed at her wasn't that people were now looking at her with sympathy. It was that no one had looked at her at all until they realized who her father was. Only now, after power had spoken, did their behavior shift. She glanced around. Some passengers had resumed their distractions, pretending she wasn't there. Others stole quick looks in her direction. She ignored them all. Her phone buzzed again. "Grant, she won't be speaking to you again unless absolutely necessary. I made that clear." She smiled faintly and typed back. "Lila." "Good." "I'd rather she didn't." She sipped her sparkling water and leaned back into the seat, letting her thoughts drift until she noticed the man across the aisle leaning forward slightly. He was older, dressed in a crisp gray suit, the kind of man who looked like he'd been flying first class for decades. "I just wanted to say what happened earlier wasn't right," he said, his voice low and cautious. "You handled it with remarkable patience." Lila looked at him for a long moment, then gave a polite nod. "Thank you." He shifted awkwardly. "You know, most people wouldn't have stayed so calm, especially at your age." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "That's the thing," she said softly. "If I had yelled, I'd be called angry. If I cried, I'd be called emotional. But if I stay calm, I'm called impressive. The man's face tensed slightly. I didn't mean it's okay, she interrupted gently. I've heard it before. He nodded once, then turned back to his magazine, embarrassed. Lila didn't take it personally. She was used to this. People always had ideas about what strength should look like, what belonging should sound like, who was allowed to exist in certain spaces. And now they were being forced to rethink it. In the cockpit, Captain Hale remained in constant contact with Orion Command. Every few minutes, new updates came through from legal, operations, and senior leadership. Policies, contingency plans, PR risk assessments. Grant Carter hadn't raised his voice, but his mere presence had sent shockwaves through the system. Preparations for landing were already underway. Private security, executive transport, internal compliance reviews. This wasn't just a flight approaching the airport. It was a plane descending into fallout. "Captain," the co-pilot said carefully, "is it true? Has the majority stakeholder?" Hale gave a slow nod. "It's true." The co-pilot swallowed. "So what happens when we land?" The captain's eyes remained focused on the horizon. Someone's going to answer for this. He paused. "And I don't think she realizes just how bad it's about to get." The aircraft began its descent, smooth, quiet, deceptively routine. But nothing about what came next would be. The cabin lights brightened. The ding of the seatbelt sign being switched off rang through the aircraft. Passengers began to shift, stretch, and reach for their bag. But Lila Carter didn't move. She sat still. Her eyes flicked once toward the galley curtain, but it remained motionless. Denise Walker hadn't emerged. Yet. People moved slowly, cautiously. But their attention stayed trained on the front of the cabin. The tension wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was expectation. Then softly, clearly, it happened. The click of the cabin door. A uniformed officer stepped into the aircraft. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with no visible weapon. But his presence alone drew every eye in the room. The chatter stopped. Movements froze. Passengers in the front row paused mid-reach for their luggage. The officer scanned the space with quiet clarity, then said in a low voice, "Denise Walker." Silence. Then, the curtain at the galley stirred. Slowly, it pulled back. Denise stepped out. Her face was pale, her composure cracked. She tried to appear calm, but her hands betrayed her, trembling at her sides. "Yes," she said softly. "You'll need to come with us," the officer replied. A few passengers gasped. Others exchanged stunned glances. Some just stared straight ahead, eyes wide. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "There's been a report of a discriminatory incident involving a first-class passenger," the officer said. "Mr. Grant Carter has requested a formal review. You're being escorted for questioning." Denise nodded once, slow and heavy. Her legs felt like lead, her arms like stone. And then she turned toward the aisle. The same aisle Lila Carter had walked hours earlier. Except now, every step Denise took felt like a mirror image of her own mistake. As she approached Lila's row, she glanced sideways. Just once. Lila didn't smirk. She didn't glare. She didn't even move. She simply watched. Calm, still, unbothered. And somehow, that was worse than any reaction Denise had feared. Her shoes tapped softly against the cabin floor. The officer trailed just behind her. Each row she passed felt like a quiet courtroom, a gallery of witnesses. No one spoke, but everyone saw. Some watched with discomfort, others with a strange sense of justice, a few with thinly veiled satisfaction, but none with pity. Denise had walked this aisle 100 times before. always with control, always with purpose. But now it felt hollow. Each step a silent countdown to a moment she'd never imagined. She kept her eyes forward, but she could feel it. The judgment, the recognition. That's her. That's the woman who sent the wrong girl to the back of the plane. When she reached the front section, she made the mistake of glancing sideways again. Lila Carter sat serene as ever, her expression unreadable. No cruelty in her eyes, just clarity, observation, the kind that makes people squirm without needing to speak. Denise looked away instantly. She stepped off the plane into the jet bridge. The air outside the cabin felt colder, sharper, like it belonged to a different world. At the end of the corridor, two men in dark suits waited. They didn't smile. They didn't nod. One of them she recognized, Marcus Lane, director of flight operations. The other wore a badge reading Samuel Rios, executive compliance manager. They didn't ask her name. They just turned and motioned for her to follow. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew. They passed into a corridor hidden behind the passenger gates. A restricted access hallway built for crew evaluations, briefings, and disciplinary reviews. The walls were a sterile gray, the lights too bright. It was quiet, too quiet. At the end of the hallway was a room, a long table, 3 chairs, a closed door. Denise was told to sit. Marcus Lane stood near the door. Samuel Rios took the seat across from her. A leather folder lay unopened between them. He didn't touch it, didn't open it, just looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "You know why you're here?" he asked. Denise nodded, her voice dry. "Yes." He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "This contains a full report from the flight captain, 4 written statements from passengers, and a formal complaint from Mr. Grant Carter himself." She swallowed hard, trying to hold her posture, but inside, everything felt like it was crumbling. The cabin lights brightened. The ding of the seatbelt sign being switched off rang through the aircraft. Passengers began to shift, stretch, and reach for their bags. But Lila Carter didn't move. She sat still. Her eyes flicked once toward the galley curtain, but it remained motionless. Denise Walker hadn't emerged. Yet. People moved slowly, cautiously, but their attention stayed trained on the front of the cabin. The tension was just curiosity anymore. It was expectation. Then softly, clearly it happened. The click of the cabin door. A uniformed officer stepped into the aircraft. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with no visible weapon. But his presence alone drew every eye in the room. The chatter stopped. Movements froze. Passengers in the front row paused mid-reach for their luggage. The officer scanned the space with quiet clarity, then said in a low voice, "Denise Walker." Silence. Then, the curtain at the galley stirred. Slowly, it pulled back. Denise stepped out. Her face was pale, her composure cracked. She tried to appear calm, but her hands betrayed her, trembling at her sides. "Yes," she said softly. "You'll need to come with us," the officer replied. A few passengers gasped. Others exchanged stunned glances. Some just stared straight ahead, eyes wide. Is there a problem?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "There's been a report of a discriminatory incident involving a first-class passenger," the officer said. "Grant Carter has requested a formal review. You're being escorted for questioning." Denise nodded once, slow and heavy. Her legs felt like lead, her arms like stone. And then she turned toward the aisle. The same aisle Lila Carter had walked hours earlier, except now every step Denise took felt like a mirror image of her own mistake. As she approached Lila's row, she glanced sideways. Just once. Lila didn't smirk. She didn't glare. She didn't even move. She simply watched. Calm, still, unbothered. And somehow, that was worse than any reaction Denise had feared. Her shoes tapped softly against the cabin floor. The officer trailed just behind her. Each row she passed felt like a quiet courtroom, a gallery of witnesses. No one spoke, but everyone saw. Some watched with discomfort, others with a strange sense of justice, a few with thinly veiled satisfaction, but none with pity. Denise had walked this aisle 100 times before, always with control, always with purpose. But now it felt hollow, each step a silent countdown to a moment she'd never imagined. She kept her eyes forward, but she could feel it. The judgment, the recognition. That's her. That's the woman who sent the wrong girl to the back of the plane. When she reached the front section, she made the mistake of glancing sideways again. Lila Carter sat, serene as ever. Her expression unreadable. No cruelty in her eyes. Just clarity, observation. The kind that makes people squirm without needing to speak. Denise looked away instantly. She stepped off the plane into the jet bridge. The air outside the cabin felt colder, sharper, like it belonged to a different world. At the end of the corridor, 2 men in dark suits waited. They didn't smile. They didn't nod. One of them, she recognized Marcus Lane, director of flight operations. The other wore a badge reading Samuel Rios, executive compliance manager. They didn't ask her name. They just turned and motioned for her to follow. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew. They passed into a corridor hidden behind the passenger gates, a restricted access hallway built for crew evaluations, briefings, and disciplinary reviews. The walls were a sterile gray, the lights too bright. It was quiet, too quiet. At the end of the hallway was a room, a long table, 3 chairs, a closed door. Denise was told to sit. Marcus Lane stood near the door. Samuel Rios took the seat across from her. A leather folder lay unopened between them. He didn't touch it, didn't open it. Just looked at her for a long, quiet moment. "You know why you're here?" he asked. Denise nodded, her voice dry. "Yes." He tapped the folder with 2 fingers. "This contains a full report from the flight captain, 4 written statements from passengers, and a formal complaint from Mr. Grant Carter himself." She swallowed hard, trying to hold her posture, but inside, everything felt like it was crumbling. Denise Walker swallowed hard. I didn't know who she was. Samuel Rios didn't flinch. His voice was calm, but pointed. "That's not the issue." He leaned forward slightly. "The problem is that you treated her like she didn't belong before knowing anything about her. You didn't verify her ticket properly. You didn't ask her with respect. You made an assumption, and you acted on it. Publicly." Denise shifted in her seat. "It wasn't personal. I've had situations like that before. People trying to sneak into." He raised his hand, silencing her. "Was anyone else in first class asked to show their ticket?" She hesitated. "Just her." He exhaled slowly. "Do you realize the position this puts Orion Air in? This wasn't a minor seating error. You didn't just remove a teenage girl from a seat she rightfully held. You humiliated the daughter of the CEO right in front of a full cabin of passengers, while her father was sitting 10 feet away." Her eyes brimmed, but she blinked rapidly, refusing to let the tears fall. "I made a mistake." "No," he said firmly. "You made a choice. And that choice, while just wrong, was dangerous." He tapped the leather folder on the table. "You didn't just violate procedure. You created a public relations disaster that's already making the rounds on 2 major platforms. Passengers were filming. Someone uploaded the video before the flight even landed." The words struck her like a blow to the chest. She had imagined damage, fallout, but not this. Samuel continued. Effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. You'll be notified of a disciplinary hearing within 72 hours. Until then, you are not to access airline property or contact current employees. Denise looked down at the table. Her voice, when it came, was barely more than a whisper. Is there any chance to fix this? Samuel tilted his head slightly. That depends. On what? On whether you're truly ready to admit what you did and why you did it, he replied. This isn't about saving your job anymore. It's about owning your judgment. If you can't do that, there is no path forward. He stood and closed the folder. You can leave now. Someone will escort you out. Denise didn't move right away. Her legs were numb, her throat raw. She had spent more than 10 years building her place in the skies, handling in-air emergencies, leading boarding protocols, training new hires, earning respect through precision. And now she was walking out on suspension, her badge stripped, her name whispered in terminals she once ruled. As she stepped into the hallway, the fluorescent lights felt harsher than ever. Cold, clinical, a spotlight that followed her every step. And behind her, the door closed with a final heavy click. Elsewhere in the terminal, tucked into the quiet warmth of the executive lounge, Lila Carter sat across from her father, a warm drink in hand, her posture relaxed. The lounge was elegant, muted, leather chairs, soft overhead lighting, the kind of place that whispered instead of speaking. A few other travelers sat in distant corners, oblivious to who she was or what had just taken place. Grant Carter leaned forward, watching her closely. You okay? Lila nodded. Yeah, they didn't say anything to me after I got back to my seat. He gave a short laugh, dry, but not unkind. I think they were afraid to. She sipped from her cup. She's been suspended. He nodded. For now. She raised an eyebrow. You're giving her a chance to explain? I believe in accountability, he said. But I also believe in growth. If she owns it, really owns it, maybe she can come back from it. And if she doesn't, Lila asked quietly. He leaned back in his chair. Then she doesn't come back at all. Lila nodded slowly, her face unreadable. She won't own it, she said. People like her almost never do. Grant didn't argue. He just watched his daughter, young but steady. Steadier than most adults he knew. He didn't need to say what he was thinking. He was proud. This wasn't just a moment for one crew member. It was a message to an entire system. The rules were changing now. And Lila Carter was the reason why. The airline-issued tablet on Denise Walker's nightstand had gone dark the moment her suspension was activated. Her phone buzzed once, then silence. She didn't bother checking. She knew what it was. Colleagues who once smiled in passing, now retreating into quiet distance. The same voices that had praised her professionalism would now be whispering through terminals and break rooms. She reached for a glass of water, but set it down untouched. Her hands still trembled. The flight felt like it had happened days ago, and yet every second replayed with brutal clarity. Lila's face, Grant's voice, Tessa's silence, the cold, expressionless stares of the executive board. And worst of all, the long, humiliating walk past passengers she had once believed herself above. For 10 years she had lived by the handbook. Procedures, protocol, professionalism. She knew every safety drill by heart, passed every inspection, wore her stripes with pride. She had thought that made her fair. She had thought it made her respected. But here, in the silence of her apartment, all of it felt paper thin, like paint cracking under pressure. The badge, the uniform, the roll-in one of it mattered now. Her eyes drifted to her phone, where an unread email waited. Subject: Suspension Notification. Orion Executive Board effective immediately. You are placed on unpaid suspension pending a formal review regarding your conduct on Flight 748. A disciplinary hearing will be scheduled within 5 business days. Until then, you are prohibited from accessing airline systems or premises. The language was cold, clinical, but the meaning screamed at her. She wasn't Denise, the respected senior crew lead. She wasn't the person others turned to. She was anything now but a liability, a risk waiting to be judged. Her inbox blinked again. New message from Grant Carter. Subject, accountability. She stared at the name. She hadn't expected this, not a direct message from him. Her thumb hovered over it, hesitant. Then she tapped. Ms. Walker, I'm sure by now you understand the seriousness of what happened on Flight 748. I won't repeat what the board has already explained, but I believe in accountability, and that includes giving people the chance to acknowledge their mistakes. I'm offering you that chance now. If you wish to apologize formally to my daughter, I will make sure she receives it. This is not an apology for me, nor for the airline. This is for her. If you can't bring yourself to do that, then there's no point in continuing this conversation. I'll wait for your response. Grant Carter. Denise set the phone down as if it had grown heavier in her hands. The message wasn't long, but every sentence had weight. There were no threats, no ultimatums, no anger, just clarity, and the demand that she finally face what she had been avoiding. She stood, walked to the kitchen, and poured herself another glass of water. This time, she made herself drink it. She needed to feel something real. For years, she had told herself she was fair, because she followed the rules, because she treated people professionally. But now she saw it clearly. The rules had become a shield one she used to hide behind, to avoid ever questioning her own bias. This wasn't the first time she had made a call based on appearance. It was just the first time the world had watched her do it. That, more than anything, was what made her uncomfortable. She returned to her room and opened her email again. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Subject: accountability. She paused, took a breath, and began to type. Mr. Carter, I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not writing to defend what I did. I'm writing because I now understand how deeply wrong it was. I misjudged your daughter. And worse, I did it with confidence. I treated her like she didn't belong. Not because of her actions, not because of a mistake, but because I assumed someone like her couldn't belong in a seat like that. I've worked in this industry for 10 years. I let that experience convince me I was beyond bias. I wasn't. I let my assumptions speak louder than the facts in front of me, and for that, I'm ashamed. If Lila is willing, I would like to apologize to her directly. But if she isn't, I understand. Denise Walker. She stared at the words. Then she pressed send. The moment the message left her outbox, she leaned back in the chair. No badge, no uniform, no power. But for the first time in days, she felt something stir within her that wasn't fear. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't relief. It was something more honest. Humility. And maybe that was where change would begin. She reread the message once, then again. When it finally left her outbox, Denise Walker leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and let out the breath she'd been holding. No badge, no uniform, no authority. But for the first time in what felt like years, she felt something honest, something real. Not pride, not defense, just humility. And maybe that was a place to start. Across town, Lila Carter sat curled up in one of the sleek leather chairs in her father's office. Her legs tucked underneath her, phone resting in her hand as she scrolled in silence. Outside, The city moved with its usual afternoon rhythm cars flowing below, sunlight striking rooftops, life continuing as always. But inside, it was still. The kind of quiet that comes only after something heavy has passed. When the dust hasn't quite settled, but the storm has ended. Her father, Grant Carter, sat at his desk, flipping through a printed report. It was thick with notes, passenger statements, internal messages, legal assessments, social media logs. The incident had gone viral faster than either of them expected. A passenger's shaky cell phone video showing Denise demanding Lila leave first class had surfaced early that morning. From there, it exploded. News blogs, comment sections. Headlines. Black teen removed from first class turns out. Her father owns the airline. CEO's daughter sent to economy. Flight attendant under investigation. But Lila wasn't reading headlines. She wasn't interested in internet outrage. She had seen too much of that before. Her focus was on one email, forwarded to her 15 minutes ago by her father. Subject, my apology. From Denise Walker. She stared at it for a moment, then tapped to open it. Lila, I know I don't deserve your time, and I won't waste it with excuses. You weren't wrong. You weren't out of place. I was. When I told you to move, I wasn't thinking about your ticket. I was thinking about what I expected to see in first class. And when I didn't see it, I acted. That wasn't just unprofessional. It was wrong. I can't undo it. But I promise I will never let myself make that mistake again. If you're willing to accept it, I'd like to apologize to you in person. If not, I understand. Either way, I want you to see what I did now. And I am truly sorry. Denise Walker. Lila read it once, then again. She set her phone down on the desk beside her and said nothing. Her father looked up, studying her face. Well, he asked gently, do you want to respond? She leaned back, her arms folding loosely across her chest. I didn't expect an apology. Not a real one, Grant agreed. And this one? She was quiet for a moment, then said, it doesn't feel fake. She's not begging. She's not trying to save her job. It actually sounds like she understood. Grant nodded. She's lost a lot. 10 years of career just gone. Lila's expression didn't change. Good. He raised an eyebrow not because she sounded cruel, but because she didn't. She sounded honest. She didn't hesitate to humiliate me, Lila added. Not for a second. And the only reason she regrets it is because she got caught. Grant leaned forward. That may be true, but people don't change if we never give them room to. I know, she said, but I don't want to shake her hand and tell her it's okay, because it's not. I'm not asking you to, he said softly, and he meant it. He respected her decision either way. Lila picked up her phone again and began typing slow, deliberate, unshaken. Subject, my apology. Denise, I read your message. I appreciate that you didn't try to defend yourself. That means something. Most people don't really see what they've done until it affects their own lives. I don't need an in-person apology. Not because I'm angry, but because I think you already understand how it felt. This wasn't just about you and me. It's about every person who gets judged before they speak, who walks into a space and is told they don't belong silently or not. I was lucky. My father was sitting behind me. Most people don't have that kind of backup. I accept your apology, not because you earned it, but because I believe people can learn. Lila Carter. She hit send without hesitation. Grant looked over at her, a quiet admiration in his eyes. You handled that with grace. Lila shrugged. I didn't do it for her. She looked out the window as her voice softened. I did it for me. Lila Carter hit send without hesitation. She didn't need to read the message again. She didn't overthink it. Across from her, Grant Carter looked at her with quiet admiration. "You handled that with grace." Lila gave a small shrug. "I didn't forgive her for her," she said. "I did it for me." They sat in thoughtful silence for a few moments. Then his phone buzzed an alert from the boardroom down the hall. "They're ready for me," he said, standing up. "Are you going to tighten the policies?" she asked. "Already in motion," Grant replied. "Mandatory bias training, new reporting tools, stronger oversight in first class." He paused before continuing. "Every crew member is going to be reminded appearances aren't policy." Lila smiled faintly. "You're changing the whole system because of one flight?" He leaned over and kissed the top of her head. "No," he said. "I'm changing it because of who they tried to erase." She watched him leave, then turned to look back out the window. She wasn't proud, because someone had been punished. She was proud because something had been exposed. And if it took one humiliating flight to spark that change, then maybe it had been worth it. Elsewhere, Denise Walker sat alone in her apartment the next morning, curled on the edge of her couch. Her uniform, once crisp, authoritative, now hung limp on a hook behind her door. She hadn't touched it since she got home. Neither had she touched the Orion-issued tote bag still sitting by the wall, filled with unused pens, safety cards, and the fractured pieces of her former pride. The sun streamed in through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor, but nothing in the room felt warm. There were no new emails, no calls, just the thick, unsettling silence that settles in after everything collapses. The kind of silence that doesn't shout, but still screams in your head. She had hoped that sending the apology would bring relief, some closure, some shift. But it hadn't. If anything, the weight had sunk deeper, not out of guilt, but out of understanding. When her phone buzzed, she hesitated. She didn't want more bad news, more boardroom updates. Another notice stamped disciplinary action pending. But when she did finally glance at the screen, her breath caught. Subject, my apology, from Lila Carter. She opened it slowly, bracing for bitterness, for rejection, or worse, silence. But instead, she read this. "Denise, I read your message. Thank you for not trying to defend yourself. That means something. Most people don't get to see what they've done until it costs them something. I don't need an in-person apology. Not because I'm angry, but because I think you already understand what it felt like. This was never just about you and me. It's about everyone who gets judged before they even speak. I was lucky. My father was sitting behind me. Most people don't have someone powerful watching. I accept your apology. Not because you deserve it, but because I believe people can learn." Lila Carter. Denise blinked at the screen for a long time. Her fingers hovered, like she might respond, though she didn't know what to say. She read it again, slowly. This time, it landed differently. Lila hadn't forgiven her to offer comfort. She hadn't been kind for the sake of kindness. She hadn't offered closure. She had offered truth. Lila hadn't seen Denise as a villain. And she certainly didn't see her as a victim. She had seen her as a person capable of both failure and growth. And it wasn't comforting, but it was clear. Denise leaned back against the couch, her palms covering her face. Her chest tightened. Not from shame, not from fear, but from something deeper. Recognition. The bitter understanding that what she had lost wasn't just her job or her place on the crew list. She had lost faith in her own judgment. She had spent a decade believing she was fair, that professionalism was protection. But fairness, she realized now, had only ever been offered to those who looked like they belonged. And that was the wound Lila had left. Not humiliation, not headlines, not a ruined resume, but the truth. Lila hadn't needed to yell. She hadn't needed to drag Denise's name through press cycles. She had simply sat there, calm, composed, and forced the world to look at what it usually ignored. Across the city, in a quiet, sunlit cafe, Lila Carter sat by the window with a notebook open in front of her, a pen twirling slowly between her fingers. She wasn't writing, not yet. She was watching. Outside, couples strolled by. Cars honked in the distance. People rushed past, none of them knowing her name, none of them aware of what had just shifted inside the airline industry they trusted every day. And that was okay. She didn't need to be the headline. She didn't need credit. She just needed to know that what happened to her wouldn't happen to someone else, that no girl would be told she didn't belong, that no young traveler would be humiliated and left to carry that shame alone. Her father was already making changes. A company-wide memo had gone out earlier that week. From ground staff to cabin crew, every single Orient employee would now go through mandatory inclusion training. Not a pre-recorded video, not a checkbox assignment, but a live, human-led session. With one purpose: unlearn what you've never been made to question. Lila sipped her tea slowly. She had thought long and hard about whether to respond to Denise's email. And in the end, she hadn't done it because Denise deserved anything. She had done it because growth, when it's real, deserves to be acknowledged, even when the pain it caused can't be undone. She didn't want to carry hate. It was too heavy, too bitter. She had her voice. She had her dignity. And now, she had change. Change that would affect thousands of travelers, every day, quietly but permanently. Across from her, Kayla, her friend, returned from the counter with 2 coffees. "Sorry. Line was ridiculous," she said, sliding into the seat. "What were you so deep in thought about?" Lila gave a soft smile. "Just thinking how fast things change when someone finally says, 'Enough.'" Kayla nodded, lifting her cup. "And how powerful it is when the world finally has to listen." Lila's phone buzzed again. A message from her father. "Grant, the board approved the policy. First round of training sessions begins next month. You started something, Lila. I'm proud of you." She stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, "Lila, it's not about pride, Dad. It's about doing what they never expected us to do. Stay seated." She hit send and closed her notebook. And for the first time since the flight, she felt something settle back inside her chest. Something quiet, something whole. Peace. Not the kind that comes from an apology, but the kind that comes from knowing you changed something that tried to erase you. 2 weeks had passed since Flight 748 landed, but the ripple effects kept spreading far beyond the runway. News outlets, travel blogs, and advocacy groups were still discussing it. What had begun as a silent injustice, one teenage girl removed from first class, had ignited a national conversation. Bias in elite spaces. Gatekeeping disguised as policy. Judgment hidden beneath a smile. But behind the doors of Orion Air's glass-walled executive suite, the discussion wasn't media-driven. It was personal. At the company's quarterly summit, Grant Carter stood at the front of a modern boardroom filled with senior advisors, regional directors, and operations heads. The screens behind him were dark. No charts, no bar graphs. Today was about profits. It was about people. "This is just about one flight," he said, scanning the room. "This is about a culture we've quietly allowed to grow." He paused. "A belief sometimes spoken, sometimes not. That comfort and dignity are privileges, not rights. That a first-class seat says something about who you are." He looked down. Then back up, voice firm. "I've seen it firsthand. My daughter lived it." Silence. The kind that meant people were finally listening. "I'm not interested in corporate apologies," he continued. "I'm interested in impact. I'm interested in building systems that stop that kind of judgment before it ever becomes action. He looked each person in the eye. And that starts with you. One of the regional managers finally raised a cautious hand. Mr. Carter, are you suggesting changes to crew discretion policies? Grant Carter didn't hesitate. I'm not suggesting, he said, voice even. I'm implementing. He clicked a remote, and behind him the screens lit up with a detailed rollout plan. Billionaire. Culture overhaul. Policy implementation. Mandatory bias awareness training for all staff, including senior leadership. Not optional, not digital only. Real-time passenger incident reporting app. Live escalations available to oversight teams during flights. Surveillance review mandates. Any crew-initiated passenger relocation requires recorded justification and review. Impact. Behavior-based promotion metrics promotions tied not only to hours and tenure, but peer-reviewed leadership conduct. Passenger experience accountability. Every flagged incident receives a human follow-up, never just an auto-response. The list was long, expensive, ambitious, but no one in the room could argue its necessity. Grant looked around one last time. We can't control how people think the moment they see someone, but we can control how we let them act on it inside this company. He paused. And if anyone has a problem with that, they're welcome to work somewhere else. Across town, at Pacific Ridge University, Lila Carter stood at the front of a crowded lecture hall. A sociology professor had invited her to speak after word of the airline incident, and her calm but firm responses spread across campus and beyond. She didn't wear anything that made a statement, just jeans, a long sweater, and the same calm expression that had startled so many adults. Her hands rested on the wooden podium, but her voice, clear, confident, not performative, real. When I was removed from first class, no one stood up, she began. No one asked the flight attendant to stop. And you know what? That wasn't the part that hurt the most. She paused. What hurt was that I expected it, that I wasn't surprised. The room stayed silent, hanging on every word. I'd been trained by life to keep my head down, to stay polite while being embarrassed, to shrink so no one would label me difficult. She took a breath. Not shaken chord. I didn't speak up right away because I didn't want to make people uncomfortable. But here's what I learned. She looked around the room. People who stay silent when they have power are more dangerous than the ones who show their bias out loud. She let that sit. My father owns an airline. That's the only reason my story ended the way it did. But what about the people who get removed and don't have someone powerful behind them? What about the ones who never get their seat back? That's why I spoke up. Not for revenge, but to make it matter. Not just for me, for everyone who's ever been told to move quietly. The applause didn't explode. It rose slowly, sincerely. A standing ovation of respect, not just admiration. After the lecture, as Lila packed her notebook into her bag, a soft voice interrupted. A girl, maybe 19, stood nervously nearby, holding a small, worn notebook. "Hi," she said. "I just wanted to say thank you." Her eyes darted downward. "I was removed from a train once. I had a valid ticket. But the staff didn't believe me. I didn't fight back. I was too scared." Lila met her gaze. "You're not alone," she said gently. "And your silence, then. It doesn't make your voice now any less important." The girl's eyes welled up. She gave a small nod before walking away, notebook clutched tightly to her chest. That evening, Lila sat across from her father at the same dinner table they'd gathered around for years. No corporate boardrooms, no cameras, just them. He set a steaming bowl of pasta in front of her and smiled. "You made the campus bulletin today," he said, amused. "A professor sent me your speech." She smiled as she picked up her fork. "Don't worry. I didn't bring shame to the company." He laughed. On the contrary, you reminded us what the company should be." They ate quietly for a moment before he asked, "Would you ever want to work in aviation?" Lila looked up, thoughtful. "Maybe, but not from the top. I think it'd rather be on the ground, talking to passengers, listening, seeing the stuff nobody reports." Grant leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. That's how real change begins. Lila Carter didn't need a title to have power. She had a voice. And now, finally, the world had started listening. Weeks turned into months. The headlines moved on, replaced by fresh controversies, newer outrages, the ever-churning news cycle. But inside Orion Air, and within the lives touched by that one flight, the impact endured. In a modest, windowless interview room at the airline's training center, Denise Walker sat upright, hands folded tightly in her lap. She wasn't wearing her old uniform. Not yet. Today wasn't about stepping back into her role. It was about proving she had earned the chance to try. Across from her sat 2 HR officials and a senior member of the newly formed Inclusion and Ethics Board, a position Orion Air created in direct response to what happened on Flight 7408. Denise had completed every requirement. Diversity and bias training. 3 behavioral review sessions. A personal reflection statement that had made its way to Grant Carter himself. And now they needed to know just one thing. Had she truly changed? Her voice was steady, not rehearsed, just real. "I can't undo what I did," she said. "I humiliated a passenger because I assumed she didn't belong." She inhaled slowly. "I've had to sit with that, not just in a classroom, but alone, in silence, at home, in front of the mirror. And I had to ask myself something I never had the courage to ask before. Was I following protocol, or was I upholding my own bias?" The room was still. One of the officers gave a small nod. Denise continued, her voice quieter now. "I know Lila Carter doesn't owe me anything, but she gave me something anyway, her forgiveness. And I've decided not to waste it. Even if I never wear that uniform again, I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life." There were no tears, no dramatic gestures, just quiet, unwavering accountability. Later that week, an email arrived in her inbox. Subject: Reinstatement. Probationary return to duty. She stared at the screen for a long time. It didn't feel like a victory. It didn't feel like redemption. It felt like a closed door opening just enough if she was willing to walk through it differently. She accepted the terms. And when she returned to the skies 4 months later, she didn't just serve passengers. She saw them. She asked every question without assumption. She greeted every traveler like they belonged because they did. Not because someone was watching, but because she finally was. Meanwhile, Lila had quietly returned to her own rhythm. She wasn't trending anymore. Her story wasn't being shared on timelines or comment threads. But the policies she inspired remained alive, reviewed quarterly by the compliance board her father created. On her suggestion, not his. She spoke at youth panels and schools from time to time, not to retell what happened, but to help others see what might happen if they didn't speak up. She didn't want to be known as the billionaire's daughter. She wanted to be remembered for what she did when no one expected her to do anything. One afternoon, a plain envelope arrived. No branding, no return address. Inside was a single handwritten note. "Lila, I flew again today. Same airline, first class. A little girl boarded in a hoodie, alone, nervous. This time I didn't question her. I offered her a drink, asked about her day, watched her smile. And I realized something. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the loudest change. Thank you." Denise Lila smiled gently. She folded the letter and tucked it into her notebook. She didn't reply. She didn't post about it. Some things she believed weren't meant to be shared. They were meant to be remembered. Not as headlines, but as shifts. That same week, Lila and her father boarded a flight. Not in first class. By choice, they sat in coach. As they walked down the aisle, Lila passed a young black boy in 1A, swinging his feet as he played with the airline's tablet. The flight attendant knelt down to his level with a warm smile. "Would you like a snack or a drink, sweetheart? You got the best seat in the house." Lila smiled, because maybe now they all did.